A live view of Launch Pad 6 Site 31 at the Pyotr Cosmodrome just went off your screen, and now you're seeing an interior view of that Soyuz MS-29 spacecraft. There on your screen is NASA astronaut Anil Menon, who is joined by his two Roscosmos crewmates, Pyotr, Dubrov, and Kikina, who are about to launch into orbit on a 2-orbit, 3-hour journey to reach their destination, the International Space Station. Countdown clocks are ticking backward for the launch of the Soyuz MS-29 spacecraft, again atop its Soyuz 2.1A booster at the Baikonur Cosmodrome. That liftoff is targeted for 9:47 and 43 seconds a.m. Central Time, 10:47 and 43 seconds a.m. Eastern Time, which is 7:47 and 43 seconds p.m. at the launch site in Baikonur. It is a warm 100 degrees Fahrenheit with clear skies down at the launch site, and earlier today the Soyuz booster was fueled for launch by engineers in Baikonur, a process that was completed just a few hours ago. The launch control team in Baikonur reports that all systems are go for launch with no issues currently being worked as the countdown enters its final phase. And there on your screen for a moment you saw a view of that Soyuz 2.1A booster as it stands fully fueled and ready for launch. And now you're seeing a live view inside the International Space Station of Flight Control Room here in Houston, Texas. This team currently on console is the Orbit 2 team of flight controllers who recently completed handover with the Orbit 1 team. Currently leading the team here is NASA Flight Director Chris Toppins, and joining him on console as the Capcom for today, or capsule communicator, is ESA, or you're preparing to support the arrival of the Soyuz MS-29 later today. The station population will increase temporarily from 7 to 10 with the addition of NASA astronaut Anil Menon and his Roscosmos crewmates. Again, that is Soyuz Commander Pyotr Dubrov and flight engineer Kikina. The crew is all set to begin a flight of just over 3 hours in duration to the International Space Station, with docking scheduled at 12:56 p.m. Central Time, 1:56 p.m. Eastern Time to the Prishal module on the Earth-facing side of the Russian segment of the International Space Station. Around 2.5 hours after docking, the hatches will be opened between the newly arrived Soyuz spacecraft and the space station. Menon, Dubrov, and Kikina will then be greeted by Station Commander Sergei Pyotr and his crewmates of Roscosmos cosmonauts Sergei Mikhaev and Andrei Fedyaev. NASA astronauts Chris Williams, Jessica Meir, and Jack Hathaway, along with European Space Agency or ESA astronaut Sophie Adonov, will also be on hand to greet the newly arrived crew. After a handover of about 2 weeks, NASA astronaut Chris Williams and his Roscosmos crewmates Sergei Pyotr and Sergei Mikhaev, who you can see there on your screen, will depart in their Soyuz MS-28 spacecraft on July 26th, heading for a parachute-assisted landing on the steppe of Kazakhstan after spending about 8 months on board the International Space Station, conducting hundreds hundreds of scientific investigations and research demonstrations. Menon and his crew will remain on board the orbiting laboratory through March of next year, returning home at that time with Dubrov and Kikina on the Soyuz MS-29 spacecraft, which they are currently on board, again waiting as part of NASA's SpaceX Crew 12 mission, providing a reciprocal crew exchange capability to maintain safe and continuous space station operations. There on your screen again, you can see live view inside the International Space Station Flight Control Room here in Mission Control, Houston. Again, the Orbit 2 team of flight controllers is currently on console. They came on console a little over an hour ago and completed that shift handover with the Orbit 1 team. And this Orbit 2 team will remain on console for the duration of today's dynamic operations all the way through docking and hatch opening later today. Again, they are being led by NASA Flight Director Chris Dobbins, and the Capcom for today, or capsule communicator, is ESA, or European Space Agency astronaut Luca Parmitano. Parmitano is a veteran of 2 space flights to the International Space Station, both on Soyuz spacecraft, so he has that experience on Soyuz, which of course is what we are focusing on today. And now he is also training for his 3rd mission as pilot for NASA's Artemis 3 mission. Today, in his role as Capcom, Parmitano serves as the voice link between teams on the ground and the Expedition 74 crew currently on board the International Space Station. We also have Visiting Vehicle Officer, or VVO, Adam Faust on console today. The Visiting Vehicle Officer serves as the guidance and navigation liaison between the space station and visiting spacecraft. Dobbins, Parmitano, Faust, and the rest of the flight control team in Houston are, of course, continuing to monitor the systems on board the space station, which will be the final destination for the Soyuz MS-29 spacecraft later today. And you're now seeing a live team at the Russian Mission Control Center. The teams in Mission Control Houston, as well as the Russian Mission Control Center, work together to operate as an integrated team for Soyuz operations and share telemetry data and voice loops throughout the dynamic operations, with the flight directors between both control centers communicating throughout. Again, you're seeing a live view of the Soyuz 2.1A rocket on its launch pad at the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. Liftoff today is scheduled for 9:47 a.m. Central Time, 10:47 a.m. Eastern Time, which is 7:47 p.m. in Baikonur in the Central Asian Desert. The countdown is continuing to proceed on schedule. We are just about 55 minutes away from launch, with no issues being recorded by engineers at the blockhouse in Baikonur. Atop the Soyuz 2.1A booster, strapped into their seats in the descent module of the Soyuz MS-29 spacecraft again are NASA astronaut Anil Menon and his Roscosmos cosmonaut crewmates Pyotr Dubrov and Kikina. Dubrov, as Soyuz commander, is in the center seat of the descent module, and he is flanked to his left by Kikina, who is serving as board engineer number 1, and to Dubrov's right is Anil Menon, who is serving as board engineer number 2. This is the first flight into space for Menon, and the second for Kikina, who has 157 days of previous spaceflight experience. It's also the second flight into space for Dubrov, who has chalked up 355 days of spaceflight experience on his previous flight. Kikina previously flew to space as part of NASA's SpaceX Crew 5 mission in 2022, and Dubrov launched aboard the Soyuz MS-29 spacecraft in the space station. For NASA's Anil Menon, today's launch marks the start of his first visit to the International Space Station. Menon was selected by NASA to join the 2021 astronaut candidate class, graduating in 2024 and then jumping right into training for this mission. Menon was born and raised in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and is an emergency medicine physician, mechanical engineer, and colonel in the United States Space Force. Let's take a moment to learn more about Anil Menon and his road to becoming an astronaut.
Alright, look over there in the lens. We want you. I got interested in medicine really early, probably when I was in high school or earlier. My mom fell off of a bicycle and this injury to her lower leg that required stitches and everything. She ended up being fine, but I went to the hospital with her. I think I remember that moment, seeing the impact that those doctors had on someone. I was a ER emergency medicine resident. It was time critical, and you could do it with your hands, and there was a problem that you could solve. That just drew me in. Medicine gets this rep of you have to go fast, and people are rushing, but I don't think that's always the case, and that's the part of it that I really liked about medicine, is having those moments of being able to help connect and know who people truly are. The earthquake in Haiti may have, for me, been one of the transformative events that happened in my medical career. It ended up being a massive earthquake that injured over 1 million people with a lot of destruction there. 4 of us doctors and 4 nurses immediately flew work experience and capability of helping people. I joined the Oregon Air National Guard as a doctor, and then I became a flight surgeon there. And so that was practicing medicine in the air, and I saw that there was jobs at NASA, so I wanted to be a NASA flight surgeon. Being a flight surgeon at NASA with the ISS program means working with the astronaut before they launch to space, make sure that they're as healthy as possible. That reduces problems when they're in space. But then as they're up there for a 6-month mission, something's going to come up. And so let's say they have a laceration or a pain. The way to help them through that is telemedicine. So you're a remote doctor. You give them a call, ask them some questions about it, and then you know all the tools that are up there, and you know how to navigate it and handle it. So you sometimes walk them through doing something, like it might be laceration repair, and then sometimes you might treat them with medications, and we've recently seen that it even goes as far as some cases you can't treat them there, and so in those cases you have to work with the whole system of NASA and evacuate them from space station and bring them back. Space makes it a little bit tricky, and so because it is tricky and every system changes in space, your cardiovascular system, your bone loss happens, your muscle mass goes down by 10%, you get vision changes, you get your fluid shifts, even your immune system goes down. Anything you can think of that you can find a doctor for on Earth, there is some change that's happening in space related to that it helps to have that specialized knowledge, and people who are spending their time treating people right now or studying about it, those are what flight surgeons are and will be in the future. So it's going to be probably one of the few fields of medicine that really expands in the coming decade. People learning about the medicine
10:47 a.m. Eastern Time, which is 7:47 p.m. in Baikonur. The countdown is proceeding on schedule with no issues being reported by launch engineers in Baikonur. There on your screen, you can see video of some of the preparations leading up to today's launch. So ahead of today's launch activities, the crew flew to the Baikonur Cosmodrome from their training base at Star City, Russia on June 11th for those final activities. Following the crew's arrival to the Baikonur Cosmodrome, they completed some final training activities, those taking place on June 30th and the 31st, about 2 weeks ago. You can see a clip of the crew as they take a look and pose for a photo in front of their Soyuz MS-29 spacecraft, which was at the integration building in Baikonur. And for context, the Soyuz MS-29 spacecraft was encapsulated into the upper stage of the Soyuz booster in that integration building just last week. There on your screen now, you can see a view of the crew's zero gravity or zero G indicator, which is actually 3 different zero G indicators all hooked together. So each crew member had the opportunity to choose and fly a zero G indicator, and Anil actually chose to fly a plush dog in remembrance of his family dog, which was a black German Shepherd named Sirius Black, who passed away earlier this year. And you're now seeing footage of the crew of their spacesuits, and in addition to the final checkouts of the Soyuz spacecraft, the crew also completed fit and pressure checks for their spacesuits, or Sokol suits, following their arrival to Baikonur. And these are those pressure suits that you can see them wearing there on your screen. They wear on board the Soyuz spacecraft during launch, docking and undocking, and re-entry. Those suits provide a safe environment for each crew member, and they are part of the crew survival system equipment. The Sokol spacesuits include an inner pressure layer as well as an outer layer, and the boots of those suits are integrated into the suit and are unable to be removed. However, the gloves are removable, as seen in the video there, where they are practicing and donning or putting on those gloves as part of those fit and pressure checks. The gloves are attached to the suit with wrist couplings, and just a few minutes ago we also heard the crew confirm that they have put those gloves on and also had closed their visors in preparation for today's launch, and they're ensuring that the suits are ready to go for that launch. Again, we are about 44 minutes away from liftoff later today. The crew did begin their quarantine period once they arrived in Baikonur, so all of the individuals in these clips are also part of that quarantine requirement alongside the crew. Ahead of all spaceflight missions, astronauts undergo a mandatory quarantine, which restricts contact with those outside of the quarantine to ensure that the crews don't contract an illness that could delay a mission. Again, all of this footage was previously recorded in the preparations leading up to today's launch video. And as the three crew members completed their training in Baikonur, the Soyuz MS-29 spacecraft was encapsulated into the upper stage of the Soyuz booster in the integration building just last week. After the 3 stages of the Soyuz 2.18 booster were mated together, the Soyuz rocket began its trek to the launch pad shortly after sunrise Saturday, July 11th, transported to the pad horizontally on a rail car, and a process that took about 30 minutes to complete. Once at the pad, the Soyuz As we continue to monitor the countdown with clocks ticking backward, we are now again showing that live shot of the Soyuz 2.1A booster with the Soyuz MS-29 spacecraft on top, and currently seated and strapped in, ready for today's launch. Inside that Soyuz spacecraft are NASA astronaut Anil Menon and his Roscosmos crewmates Pyotr, Dubrov, and Kikina. The clocks for today's launch are continuing to tick backwards. We're about 42 minutes away from launch of the next crew to the International Space Station. Out on the launch pad at Site 31 at the Baikonur Cosmodrome. Again, the Soyuz booster is poised for launch, fully fueled with kerosene and liquid oxygen as propellant. The Soyuz 2.1A is the vehicle for crews that launch to the International Space Station from the Baikonur Cosmodrome, and this is the workhorse of the Russian space program. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at the Soyuz booster. The Soyuz rocket stands 162 feet tall, weighs about 640,000 pounds, and consists of the Soyuz spacecraft inside a protective shroud at the top and the three-stage Soyuz 2.1A booster below. The first stage has 4 liquid engines strapped to the side of the core vehicle. Each will burn for 1 minute and 58 seconds before they drop away. The core engine of the first stage also serves as the second stage and continues to burn until 4 minutes and 57 seconds into the flight. The third stage has a single engine that will ignite before the separation of the second stage, helping to push it away safely. It will burn until the 8-minute 2.1A booster, which is the ticket to ride for the Soyuz crews to the International Space Station. And you're now again seeing that live view of the launch pad where the Soyuz 2.1A booster and its Soyuz MS-29 spacecraft are stacked and ready for launch. The clock continuing to tick backwards, about 40 minutes away from that launch of NASA astronaut. So here's a close look at the Soyuz spacecraft.
The whole Soyuz spacecraft is 24.5 feet long with an overall volume of 177 cubic feet and comprised of 3 modules. The descent module, situated in the middle of the Soyuz vehicle, contains customized seats for the crew members during launch, entry, and landing, and contains all the controls and displays necessary for the flight. It also houses life support systems, batteries for the re-entry and landing, and the parachute and soft landing rocket engines that slow the Soyuz just before touchdown as the spacecraft lands in Kazakhstan. There are 8 hydrogen peroxide thrusters located on the module, which are used to control the spacecraft's orientation, or attitude, during the descent until parachute deployment. The descent module also contains a guidance, navigation, and control system used to maneuver the vehicle during the descent phase of the mission. This descent module is 7.3 feet long with a diameter of 7.1 feet and a habitable volume of 124 cubic feet. It is the only portion of the Soyuz that survives the return to Earth. The orbital module at the top is 9.8 feet long. It connects to the descent module via pressurized hatch. This is where the crew has a small amount of room to move around following launch during the flight to the space station. It has a docking mechanism, hatch, and rendezvous antennas located at the front end. The docking mechanism is used to dock with the space station, and the hatch allows entry into the orbiting complex. The rendezvous antennas are used by the automated docking system, which uses radar, to maneuver toward the station for docking. There is also a forward-looking window in the module that the crew can use to take manual measurements of distance and closing speed with a laser rangefinder in the event of failure of the rendezvous radar system. The propulsion module houses the oxygen storage tanks, the main engine, and the attitude control thrusters, avionics, and communication and control equipment. The propulsion portion of this module handles all orbital maneuvers, including those needed for the rendezvous with the space station and the deorbit burn at the end of the spacecraft's mission. Before they are deployed, the 2 solar arrays are folded against the body of the propulsion module, which, along with the orbital module, separates from the descent module after the deorbit burn. The solar panels span almost 35 feet. The entire spacecraft serves not only as a crew transport vehicle to and from the space station, but also as an emergency return vehicle in the unlikely event the crew needs to leave the station unexpectedly.
Again, that was a look at the Soyuz spacecraft, and now you are seeing a live view of the Soyuz 2.1A booster, and that Soyuz MS-29 spacecraft is encapsulated inside there. And on your screen, you can see as the gantry arms surrounding the spacecraft are beginning to be lowered. Those are those green arms that were buttressed up next to the Soyuz 2.1A booster. There are two service umbilicals which are still attached to the side of the Soyuz booster. And the first of those umbilicals will retract around the T-minus 35 second mark, and the second will retract at the T-minus 15 second mark, which will then initiate engine sequence start of the first and second stage engines. Engine start of the first stage comes in three phases. There's the preliminary, an intermediate, and a final, where the engines are then up to full throttle. Again, there's a closer up view of those gantry arms as they begin to retract as we continue to count down for today's launch of the Soyuz MS-29 spacecraft carrying NASA astronaut Anil Menon and his Roscosmos cosmonaut crewmates Pyotr, Dubrov, and Kikina to the International Space Station. We're now about 36 minutes away from that launch. Again, that launch scheduled for 9:47 and 43 seconds a.m. Central Time this morning, 10:47 and 43 seconds a.m. Eastern Time, which is about 7:43 and 43 seconds p.m. in Baikonur. The launch today is a 10-second launch window at that time. In addition to the gantry arms retracting, there will be several other milestones leading up to today's launch. Many of those coming once we reach the T-minus 10-minute mark of the countdown, so about 25 minutes from now. At about T-minus 7 minutes, the pre-launch operations will be officially complete, and at that point in the countdown, the Soyuz booster is officially ready for launch. And the engineers will continue to receive telemetry from both the Soyuz 2.1A booster and the Soyuz MS-29 spacecraft to indicate that all primary and backup systems are set to support liftoff. About a minute after that mark, at T-minus 6 minutes, the launch key will then be inserted into the launch bunker, and this is a real key that transitions the launch sequence into automatic mode. About 30 seconds after that, at T-minus 5 minutes and 30 seconds, Launch Control will report that the range at Baikonur is clear and the Soyuz rocket is ready to begin its journey. 30 seconds after that, at T-minus 5 minutes, the onboard systems will switch to onboard control, and the commander's cockpit displays and controls will be activated, and the crew members will also close their helmet visors, which will put them on suit oxygen. A minute later, the fuel lines and other elements of the rocket engines will then be purged with nitrogen to fireproof them, which will remove vapors of fuel and oxidizer. About a minute and 15 seconds after that, the booster's fuel tanks will officially be pressurized for flight, which optimizes the flow of fuel and helps to add structural support to the rocket. About a minute and a half after that, around the T-minus 1 minute and 30 second mark, things will pick up and the ground propellant feed will be terminated to the Soyuz booster. And shortly after that, the Soyuz will then be on internal power. And again, at around the T-minus 35 second mark, the first umbilical tower will separate from the booster and we will have that auto sequence start. And then the ground umbilical to the third stage will be disconnected. And then the second umbilical tower will separate, which will initiate engine sequence start. And then the launch or lower. Those are those two main towers of the Soyuz 2.1A spacecraft. Again, you're continuing to see a live view of that Soyuz 2.1A booster and its Soyuz MS-29 spacecraft as we continue to count down for today's launch. We're just under 33 minutes away from launch as those countdown clocks continue to tick backwards. And there on your screen, you can see a live look inside that Soyuz MS-29 spacecraft. In the bottom portion of your screen is the Soyuz commander for today, who is Roscosmos cosmonaut Pyotr Dubrov. And to the right, on the upper hand side of the screen, is Roscosmos cosmonaut Kikina. And just out of the field of view On the other side of Dubrov is NASA astronaut Anil Menon. Dubrov is seated in the center as the commander, and then Kikina is serving as board engineer number 1, and Menon is serving as board engineer number 2 for today's flight. You briefly heard some music there, and that music you hear is music specifically chosen by the crew, and it's piped into the descent module of the Soyuz for the crew to listen to and help them relax at this point in the countdown. And there on your screen you can now see NASA astronaut Anil Menon as he is strapped in to the descent module of the Soyuz spacecraft, and dangling above on the top portion of the screen is that zero gravity indicator, which we saw a look at earlier. Again, these are actually 3 separate little items that each crew member was able to choose, and they hooked them all together. So for Anil, he chose to fly a plush dog, which was in remembrance of his family dog, which was a black German Shepherd who recently passed away. Again, the clock continuing to tick backwards. We're just about 31 minutes away from today's launch. That launch scheduled for 9:47 a.m. Central, 10:47 a.m. Eastern, which is 7:47 p.m. in Baikonur. For those of you who are just joining us, you're seeing a live look inside the Soyuz MS-29 spacecraft, the descent module specifically, and there on your screen you can see NASA astronaut Anil Menon, and next to him is Roscosmos cosmonaut Pyotr Dubrov, and then next to him and out of the field of view is Roscosmos cosmonaut Kikina. The trio is set to launch on top of the Soyuz 2.1A rocket from its launch pad at the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. Again, that liftoff scheduled for 9:47 a.m. Central Time, 10:47 a.m. Eastern Time, which is 7:47 p.m. in Baikonur in the Central Asian Desert. The countdown is continuing to proceed on schedule with no issues being reported by engineers at the blockhouse in Baikonur. Again, following today's launch, the Soyuz MS-29 will have a 2-orbit journey ahead of it before docking to the International Space Station. That docking scheduled to take place later today at 12:56 p.m. Central, 1:56 p.m. Eastern to the Prishal module on the Earth-facing side of the station's Russian segment. Once the crew docks, teams will work through procedures to conduct leak checks and pressurization of the vestibule, which is the space between the Soyuz hatch and the station hatch, exposed to the vacuum of space prior to that docking. In preparation for hatch opening, that pressurization will take place along with leak checks, and following this morning's launch, we will return on air for docking coverage at 12:10 p.m. Central, 1:10 p.m. Eastern, with hatch opening coverage taking place at 2:30 p.m. Central, 3:30 p.m. Eastern. Once the hatches are open, the newly arrived Soyuz MS-29 crew will join the rest of the Expedition 74 crew on board the International Space Station for a brief welcoming ceremony, and then begin a handover with the MS-28 crew, who will return to Earth later this month, returning NASA astronaut Chris Williams back to Earth. And during his 8-month stay as part of Expedition 74 and 75, NASA astronaut Anil Menon will conduct scientific investigations and technology demonstrations to help prepare humans for future exploration missions to the Moon and Mars, which will benefit people on Earth. One of those experiments is called in-space production of semiconductor crystals. Researchers are continuing to fine-tune in-space production of semiconductor crystals to enable large-scale manufacturing and boost the development of a low Earth orbit commercial economy. These complex materials are critical for high-performance computing, augmented reality, aerospace, and autonomous and artificial intelligence systems. Another experiment that Anil will support is known as Venus Flow, which studies astronaut vein structure, blood flow, and blood composition in microgravity to identify if physical differences cause blood flow abnormalities during spaceflight. Researchers will look to see if there are correlations between these factors and work to develop preventative measures for at-risk crew members.
Pressure of water as 20^4.
Again, we are continuing to count down for today's launch. We're about 26 minutes away from that liftoff, which is scheduled to take place at 9:47 p.m. Central, 10:47 a.m. 9:47 a.m. Central, 10:47 a.m. Eastern. Right now you're seeing a view from the balcony of the Russian Mission Control Center, which is in Koryov, outside of Moscow in Russia. Launch of the Soyuz today is led by engineers from the blockhouse in Baikonur, and then control will then be transferred to this Russian Mission Control Center, and of course the teams here in Mission Control Houston inside the International Space Station Flight Control Room work closely with the team in Russia in preparation for today's rendezvous and docking taking place later today. The teams here in Mission Control Houston recently did do a go no-go poll to indicate station readiness to receive the Soyuz spacecraft. And now on your screen you are seeing some video from earlier today. Launch day for the 3 crew members began several hours ago. They were awakened at their cosmonaut hotel crew quarters to begin their final pre-launch activities. The crew then signed their names on the doors to the rooms in the cosmonaut hotel where they spent the past 2 weeks. And then to traditional farewell music, the crew departed the cosmonaut hotel and boarded a bus, that bus there on your screen, for about a 35-minute ride to the integration and suit-up facility at Building 254 inside the Baikonur Cosmodrome. Again, this was the scene several hours ago as the crew departed the cosmonaut hotel. And there on your screen you can see as the crew arrived to the integration building, and each crew member underwent final medical exams and suited up in their Sokol launch and entry suits. One by one, the crew members moved to a mock-up of a Soyuz spacecraft seat to allow technicians to conduct pressure checks, ensuring that their suits were airtight and free of any leaks. Undergoing those checks first is the Soyuz commander for today, who is Roscosmos cosmonaut Pyotr Dubrov.
We're back over here.
And there briefly on your screen you can see NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman, who flew to the Baikonur Cosmodrome in support of today's launch of NASA astronaut Anil Menon. While they were in the integration building, family members and invited guests looked on across a protective pane of glass to maintain that quarantine. And that suit-up was completed a little over 5 hours prior to launch. And then after the commander for the Soyuz spacecraft today, Pyotr Dubrov, completed his
final checks, NASA astronaut Anil Menon then began his checks of the Sokol suit. Again, they move into a mock-up of the Soyuz spacecraft, which allows the technicians there to conduct pressure checks and ensure that their suits are airtight and free of any leaks.
Yeah, it's because I think he has glasses.
Again, this video coming from several hours ago as the crew completed some final suit checks ahead of today's launch. One by one, they completed those final pressure checks using a mock-up of the Soyuz spacecraft seat. Soyuz Commander Pyotr Dubrov, who's a Roscosmos cosmonaut, completed that check first, followed by NASA astronaut Anil Menon, who is serving as board engineer number 2 today on board the Soyuz MS-29 spacecraft. And there you can see NASA astronaut Anil Menon speaking to his Soyuz commander, Pyotr Dubrov, as Roscosmos cosmonaut on a Kikina then completed her suit checks. Again, Kikina is serving as board engineer number 1 today on board the Soyuz MS-29 spacecraft.
I'll get to work on Anna's video.
As those checks were completed, they did have family members and guests looking across a pane of glass, and then the crew had the opportunity to exchange final remarks with senior NASA and Roscosmos managers.
I'm full of joy. Thank you very much.
Here you can see as Roscosmos cosmonaut on a Kikina exchanges some of those final remarks. We also briefly saw NASA astronaut Anil Menon. This is also a chance and a final opportunity for the crew to receive a status on vehicle preparations, and it's also an opportunity for folks to provide good luck remarks.
Greetings to the team there, to Kutzberchkov and the other guys. So best greetings from Korolev family. Самые лучшие пожелания от семьи Сергея Павловича Королева.
Best wishes from the family of Sergei Korolev.
Oh.
You are in our thoughts. Looking forward to see you back. The state commission has taken place. The rocket is being filled up. By the time you are there, everything will be ready. Everything is nominal. Wishing you good luck. You know everything.
Anil, you are all true professionals. I have no doubt you will represent NASA and Roscosmos very well. Anil, to you, few have ever worked harder in their life to chase their dreams. No one has earned this more. Godspeed, my friend.
Congratulations to the entire crew. Anil, on behalf of all of Team Menon behind us, Chance and Jennifer Saltzman, all Americans, we're so proud of you. We love you. May God bless you and protect you throughout this entire mission. Godspeed, my friend.
Thank you, sir.
Again, that was as the crew exchanged final remarks with senior NASA and Roscosmos managers. We did see NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman as well as Deputy Administrator Matt Anderson as they provided some final words of good luck and parting wisdom for NASA astronaut Anil Menon. And then, as tradition called for, the crew members left the Site 254 integration building in Baikonur, allowing Pyotr Dubrov, who's the Soyuz commander, to report that he and his crewmates were ready to proceed to the launch pad.
Inaudible.
The trio then headed to their bus, which they boarded for their ride to launch site 31 at about 6:06 a.m. Central Time, 7:06 a.m. Eastern Time, Tuesday morning, which was about 4:06 p.m. Tuesday afternoon in Baikonur.
Now onto the bus.
There you can see as people wish the crew well and the crew waves goodbye as they left the integration building and began their trek out to the launch pad. Again, that trip took a little less than an hour to complete across the sprawling and desolate launch complex. There you can see as the Soyuz MS-29 crew arrived at the launch complex. Leading the crew is Roscosmos cosmonaut Pyotr Dubrov, and NASA astronaut Anil Menon is flanked to his right with Roscosmos cosmonaut Kikina to his right. After arriving at the launch pad, the crew then had to climb a few stairs. And you can see there NASA astronaut Anil Menon being joined by NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman and Deputy Administrator Matt Anderson, leading them to those stairs. Again, the crew then climbed those stairs and waved goodbye to well-wishers. At the top of those stairs is Roscosmos cosmonaut Kikina, and then NASA astronaut Anil Menon, and at the base is the Soyuz commander, who is Roscosmos cosmonaut Pyotr Dubrov, again waving a final goodbye as they prepare to board their launch vehicle. Again, this video being captured several hours ago.
Thank you.
After they did their final waves, the crew entered the elevator for the ride to the top of the Soyuz rocket to board their spacecraft. And the crew has now been aboard that Soyuz MS-29 spacecraft for about the past 2 hours. With that B-roll feed now complete, we are now back live looking at the launch pad where the Soyuz 2.1A booster stands ready for launch in just about 12 minutes from now. At the time of launch, the International Space Station will be flying over southwest Kazakhstan, moving from southwest to northeast. The station will be 286 miles behind Soyuz and will pass directly over the Baikonur Cosmodrome 28 seconds after the Soyuz 2.1A booster lifts off, leapfrogging past the Soyuz as Menon, Dubrov, and Kikina climb to their preliminary orbit. 8 minutes and 45 seconds after launch, the third stage engine of the Soyuz booster will shut down, and the Soyuz spacecraft will separate from its launch vehicle in its preliminary orbit, deploying its solar arrays and navigational antennas. At that point, the 3 Soyuz crew members will be 1,137 miles behind and 142 miles below the space station, and the chase will begin. This will then result in a docking to the Prishal node module on the Earth-facing side of the space station's Russian segment at around 12:56 p.m. Central Time, 1:56 p.m. Eastern Time. Again, following today's launch at 9:47 a.m. Central Time, 10:47 a.m. Eastern Time, which is 7:47 p.m. in Baikonur, the crew has a 2-orbit, 3-hour journey ahead of that docking later today. At the launch site on the steppe of Kazakhstan, NASA officials are on hand to watch the beginning of the journey for NASA astronaut Anil Menon and his Roscosmos crewmates Pyotr, Dubrov, and Anna Kikina. Leading the NASA delegation on hand for today's launch is NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman, NASA Human Spaceflight Deputy Administrator Joel Montalbano, International Space Station Deputy Program Manager Dina Cantella, Deputy Flight Operations Director Kjell Lindgren, and NASA astronaut Joe Akaba. And joining that delegation is NASA Public Affairs Officer Joseph Zakchevsky, who filed this report a short time ago.
Thank you, Anna, and good evening from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, just a few miles away from the launch pad where the Soyuz stands ready for liftoff. In addition to the NASA officials that you had mentioned, here to support the crew are several family members and friends of NASA astronaut Anil Menon, including his wife Anna, who flew alongside Administrator Jared Isaacman on the Polaris Dawn mission back in 2024. When Anil reaches orbit, he and Anna will become the 11th spouse team to fly in space. During the crew press conference, Menon shared his excitement for the mission and is eager to begin scientific research on his very first day aboard the orbiting laboratory. He is also excited to bring many personal family traditions to the station, including celebrating the Christmas holiday season with his expedition crewmates. The weather heading into these final moments before launch is in the high 90s Fahrenheit, and there will be a special moment for those here at the viewing site as the International Space Station will fly over Baikonur just seconds after liftoff. We continue to stand by for the launch of NASA astronaut Anil Menon and Roscosmos cosmonauts Pyotr Dubrov and Anna Kikina on their journey to the International Space Station. Back over to you, Anna.
Again, that was NASA Public Affairs Officer Joseph Zakchevsky, who is at the launch site in Kazakhstan alongside the rest of the NASA delegation awaiting today's launch of the Soyuz MS-29 spacecraft, which will carry NASA astronaut Anil Menon and Roscosmos cosmonauts Pyotr Dubrov and Anna Kikina to the International Space Station for an 8-month mission. We're just under 9 minutes away from today's launch, and you are seeing a view inside the Soyuz spacecraft. There on your screen, you can see NASA astronaut Anil Menon, and he is joined by the commander of the Soyuz, who is Pyotr Dubrov, who is seated next to Menon inside that descent module of the Soyuz. And then just out of field of view is Roscosmos cosmonaut Anna Kikina. Menon today is serving as board engineer number 2 for the spacecraft. Kikina is serving as board engineer number 1, and Dubrov is the commander of the Soyuz spacecraft. Coming up in just over a minute, around the T-minus 7-minute mark, pre-launch operations will be complete, and at that point in the countdown, the Soyuz booster is officially ready for launch as engineers will continue to receive telemetry from both the Soyuz 2.1A booster and the Soyuz MS-29 spacecraft, which will indicate that all primary and backup systems are set to support liftoff. Again, launch today is scheduled for 9:47 a.m. Central Time, 10:47 a.m. Eastern Time, which is 7:47 p.m. in Baikonur. Following their approximately 8-minute and 50-second ride to orbit, the crew will then have a 2-orbit, 3-hour chase to the space station ahead of a docking later today around 12:56 p.m. Central, 1:56 p.m. Eastern Time.
16-3, 1 minute readiness. Everything is per schedule. The launch will broadcast. I copy. Everything is fine on board. We are ready for launch. Copy.
And you were just hearing some interpretation there of the crew and the teams on the ground as the countdown continues. We did hear confirmation there that the crew on board the Soyuz MS-29 spacecraft is go for today's launch, just under 7 minutes from now. Now that we are inside that 7-minute mark, the pre-launch operations are officially complete, so the Soyuz booster is ready for launch, and the engineers continuing to receive telemetry from the Soyuz booster and its spacecraft. And the launch today is precisely timed for the moment when the Earth's rotation will place the Baikonur Cosmodrome in the plane or corridor of the orbit of the space station, which is inclined 51.6 degrees to either side of the equator. Coming up in just a few moments at T-minus 6 minutes, the launch key will be inserted into the launch bunker, and this is a real key that transitions the launch sequence into automatic mode. Now that we're inside that T-minus 6 minute mark ahead of today's launch, that launch key has been inserted into the launch bunker, so the launch sequence has officially transitioned into automatic mode. And coming up in just under 7 seconds or so from now at T-minus 5 minutes and 30 seconds, we will hear launch control report that the range at Baikonur is clear and that the Soyuz rocket is ready to begin its journey. And coming up in just about 10 seconds from now, around the T-minus 5 minute mark, the onboard systems will switch to onboard control and the commander's cockpit displays will be activated. The crew members will also close their helmet visors, which will put them on suit oxygen. Again, you are seeing a live look at the Soyuz 2.1A booster, which stands ready to launch NASA astronaut Anil Menon alongside his Roscosmos crewmates, Pyotr, Dubrov, and Anna Kikina, to the International Space Station. We are now inside that 5 minute mark, approaching 4 minutes and 30 seconds away from today's launch. And about 30 seconds from now, the fuel lines and other elements of the rocket engine are going to be purged with nitrogen, which will fireproof them by removing vapors of fuel and oxidizer. Again, today's launch is scheduled to take place at 9:47 a.m. Central Time, 10:47 a.m. Eastern Time, which is 7:47 p.m. in Baikonur. The countdown clock's continuing to tick backwards and everything proceeding as planned with no issues being reported from engineers at the blockhouse in Baikonur. And we're now just under 4 minutes away from today's launch of the Soyuz MS-29 spacecraft, so the fuel lines and other elements of the rocket engines are now being purged with nitrogen to fireproof them. And coming up in just about a minute from now at the T-minus 2 minute and 45 second mark, the booster's fuel tanks are officially being pressurized for flight, which will optimize the flow of fuel and help to add structural support to the rocket. For those of you who are just joining us, we are in the final moments of the launch countdown for the Soyuz MS-29 spacecraft, which is encapsulated on top the Soyuz 2.1A booster, which you can see there in the center of your screen. This rocket is preparing to launch NASA astronaut Anil Menon and Roscosmos cosmonauts Pyotr, Dubrov, and Anna Kikina on a 2-orbit, 3-hour journey to the International Space Station, where they will remain for an 8-month mission. And now that we are about 2.5 minutes away from today's launch, the booster's fuel tanks are now being pressurized for flight, which helps to optimize the flow of fuel and add structural support to the rocket. And just under a minute from now, around the T-minus 1 minute and 30-second mark, the ground propellant feed will be terminated to the Soyuz booster. About 30 seconds after that, the Soyuz will then be transitioned to internal power, and we will be inside the T-minus 1 minute mark to liftoff. Again, that liftoff scheduled to take place at 9:47 and 43 seconds a.m. Central Time, 10:47 and 43 seconds a.m. Eastern Time, which is 7:43 and 47 and 43 seconds in Baikonur. Again, you are seeing a live look of the Soyuz 2.1A booster, that Soyuz MS-29 spacecraft encapsulated on top of that rocket. We are just under T-minus 1.5 minutes away from today's liftoff. It is a 10-second window. So now that we are inside that mark, the ground propellant feed has now been terminated to the Soyuz booster. In about 15 seconds, the Soyuz will officially be on internal power. And then once we get to the T-minus 35-second mark, the first umbilical tower will separate from the booster, and we will have auto-sequence start, which will be followed by the ground umbilical to the third stage disconnecting. And then around T-minus 15 seconds, the second umbilical tower will separate, which will initiate engine sequence start. We are less than a minute away from today's liftoff of the Soyuz MS-29 spacecraft, which means the Soyuz is now on internal power.
Disconnect. Vehicle to internal power. Separation of first umbilical tower from booster.
The separation of the first umbilical tower has now separated from the booster, so we have auto sequence start. You can see that umbilical falling away there.
20,
And the second umbilical tower will separate momentarily, which will initiate engine sequence start. We are under 20 seconds away from today's launch.
Tower off and liftoff. Liftoff. Launch command issued for ignition.
The launch command has been issued.
Second umbilical tower separates. Engine 10 pumps at flight speed.
Booster ignition now at full throttle and liftoff. Menon, Dubrov, and Kikina now on their way to the International Space Station as part of a 2-orbit journey.
All the system parameters are nominal.
We have good roll, pitch, and yaw as we head downrange.
Engines of the first and second stage are functioning nominally.
We have confirmation that the first and second stage engines have good performance. We have good structural parameter performance, and the Soyuz is delivering 930,000 pounds of thrust from its 4 boosters and single engine. The first stage of the Soyuz measures 68 feet in length and 24 feet in diameter, burning liquid fuel for the first 2 minutes and 6 seconds of flight. We're now a minute into today's flight. Everything continuing to proceed as planned, and the velocity is currently 1,100 miles per hour.
70. The flight is nominal. 70. Flight nominal.
We're now a minute and 20 seconds into today's flight of the Soyuz MS-29 spacecraft on top that Soyuz 2.1A booster. We still have good first stage performance.
90. First and second stage engines stable.
17 hours, 47 minutes, 43
The pressure is 1511, 1429, copy.
We're now 1 minute and 54 seconds into today's flight, so the escape tower has been jettisoned. And momentarily, the 4 strap-on boosters have been jettisoned, and these have completed their job and have dropped away at an altitude of 28 statute miles. The Soyuz is now traveling at about 3,350 miles an hour, and there you can see on your screen as those 4 strap-on boosters were jettisoned.
The pressure is nominal.
Again, everything continuing to proceed as planned. We are receiving good reports of the structural performance of the Soyuz as it continues its ride uphill. We are now just over 2.5 minutes into today's launch of the Soyuz MS-29 spacecraft, and that launch shroud has now been jettisoned, and the rocket's altitude is now about 48 miles high. And we're now seeing an external rocket camera view that the crew will switch in to replace the in-cabin view at that time of fairing separation. We're now 3 minutes into today's launch of the Soyuz spacecraft. Everything continuing to proceed as planned and receiving good reports from the blockhouse in Baikonur. The Soyuz is now traveling at a speed of about 4,700 miles per hour. The Soyuz core stage is performing as expected, and the core stage of the Soyuz is 56 feet in length, 13.5 feet in diameter, with a single engine with 4 fuel chambers providing between 178,000 and 220,000 pounds of thrust for its 3 minute and 28 seconds of operation.
210 seconds. Control system parameters nominal. Copy. On board.
We're about 3 minutes and 45 seconds into today's flight of the Soyuz as it continues its flight uphill. It is about an 8 minute and 50-second total ride to orbit before we have that third stage separation, and the Soyuz spacecraft will be on its way to chase the International Space Station.
Copy. The crew are feeling fine.
The core stage, once it was ignited, continues to burn until the 4 minute 43-second mark, which is coming up in about 30 seconds from now. And the Soyuz uses what's called a hot stage technique, and the third stage will then ignite while the second is still burning. And this is why the Soyuz has an open area in between the second and third stages. We are continuing to receive good reports of the Soyuz performance as it continues its journey uphill. We're now about 4 minutes and 50 seconds into today's flight. So the third stage did begin igniting at that 4 minute 45-second mark, which means the second stage is now shutting down. And we do have confirmation of second stage separation.
Copy separation of second stage.
And that separation taking place at an altitude of 105 miles. So the Soyuz is now being propelled by the single engine of the Soyuz third stage, and this engine is providing 67,000 pounds of thrust and will burn for a total of 4 minutes and 2 seconds. We're now about 5.5 minutes into today's launch of the Soyuz spacecraft. We're about 3 minutes away from that third stage separation, at which point the Soyuz spacecraft and its crew will officially be on their way to the International Space Station. Again, that third stage shutdown taking place about 8 minutes and 46 seconds into today's launch, about 3 minutes from now, shortly followed by that third stage separation.
360 seconds. Pitch your roll nominal. Copy. On board, everything is fine.
We're now just over 6 minutes and 20 seconds into today's launch of the Soyuz 2.1A booster, which was carrying the Soyuz MS-29 spacecraft to orbit as it begins its journey to the International Space Station. We are continuing to receive good reports of good pitch and yaw of the spacecraft as it continues its journey uphill. And about a minute from now, the velocity of the spacecraft will reach about 13,500 miles an hour. Again, all of those performance callouts that you're hearing, those are being reported by the engineers at the blockhouse in Baikonur. After orbital insertion, the command will officially be transitioned to the Russian Mission Control Center in Koryov, right outside of Moscow.
Copy. comm has gotten worse. I don't hear you well enough. I copy.
We are now 7.5 minutes in following the liftoff of the Soyuz 2.1A booster. Again, that liftoff taking place at 9:47 a.m. Central Time, 10:47 a.m. Eastern Time. The performance of the vehicle continuing to proceed as expected, and we are now under a minute away from that third stage shutdown, quickly followed by third stage separation.
Everything is fine on board. We're feeling great. Still, comm is not ideal. I don't hear you well enough.
Once the third stage delivers the Soyuz to orbit and the module is separated, a series of pre-programmed commands will be executed to prepare the Soyuz for orbital operations.
Everything is fine.
These stored commands, called time-tagged commands, allow many of the Soyuz's systems to be automatically activated by onboard computers at precise times stored in those computers.
500. The flight is going well. Copy. On board,
We are
fine.
about 15 seconds away from that third stage cutoff and separation. Right now, about 8 minutes and 40 seconds into today's flight.
Get ready for separation.
And we have confirmation of preliminary separation of that third stage.
5:30.
And there you could see it falling away on the upper portion of your screen. So again, that third stage cutoff and separation taking place about 8 minutes and 50 seconds into today's flight. And we have confirmation that the Soyuz MS-29 spacecraft has been officially inserted into orbit. So the Soyuz capsule and its crew are now safely in orbit, and the spacecraft is automatically executing its pre-programmed commands, which then deployed those solar arrays, which you can see there on your screen. Those pre-programmed controls also, of course, deploy the antennas. So now that the Soyuz spacecraft and its crew are safely in orbit, control of the spacecraft from here on out will be overseen from the Russian Mission Control Center outside of Moscow in Koryov.
And you're welcome to select KSP to the left formats.
And we have confirmation that all of the solar arrays and antennas have been successfully deployed following that orbital insertion.
Monitoring.
Again, this comes following a liftoff of the Soyuz 2.1A booster, which carried the Soyuz MS-29 spacecraft to orbit following a launch from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan at 9:47 a.m. Central, 10:47 a.m. Eastern, which was 7:47 p.m. at the Baikonur Cosmodrome launch site in Kazakhstan. Now that the crew, which includes NASA astronaut Anil Menon alongside his Roscosmos cosmonaut crewmates, Pyotr, Dubrov, and Kikina, are safely in orbit, they are now beginning their to-orbit 3-hour chase to the International Space Station. We do expect that docking to take place at around 12:56 p.m. Central Time, 1:56 p.m. Eastern Time. Oh, what?
Radio link. You should have a rendezvous display on INPU. Yes, we can see the video. Copy, Moscow.
And you're now seeing a view from the balcony, this looking into the Russian Mission Control Center in Koryov outside of Moscow in Russia. Now that the Soyuz spacecraft is safely in orbit, the Russian Mission Control Center has now taken over control of the spacecraft. Prior to that orbital insertion, the engineers at the blockhouse in Baikonur were in control of today's launch activities. Of course, the team out in Russia at the Russian Mission Control Center outside of Moscow are working closely with our team here in the International Space Station Flight Control Room at Mission Control Houston in preparation for today's rendezvous and docking operations. Following that rendezvous and docking, the crew on board the space station, the Expedition 74 crew, will of course officially welcome the new arrivals, and it will briefly increase the station population from 7 to 10.
90 and 894 is the next measurement. At 18:00:15, I deactivated the KDU system. Tigris 2, we are standing by. Form 03. And let's start with line item 17. Moscow, Tigris 2, I am ready to read out the form 03 for you. Go ahead. Line 17, 17.1, line 18, 18, 16.5, 19, 272, 20, 1.1, line 21, 0.8, 22nd, 335, 23rd, 337, 24, 17.6, line 25, 17.9, line 26, 270, prop 878. Copy. Tigris 2, you can perform the display checkout per page 38. And we have completed the vertical build, and we are moving on to the EKV sensors. Copy. Tigris. For current, the current VHF-COM is going to be over at 1808. Once the compass is over, please deactivate COM assets from the control panel, and then we are going to test relay satellites at 1812 with plus or minus 2-minute correction. Copy. 1812. And please monitor the activation. It's going to be activated via command radio link. Copy. 1820 is the end of the compass using satellites. Copy.
And you were hearing some interpreted conversations of the crew on board the Soyuz spacecraft as they complete some communications checkouts, and that comes following the orbital insertion and launch of the Soyuz MS-29 spacecraft and its crew just under 20 minutes ago. Again, that liftoff of a Soyuz 2.1A booster carrying the Soyuz MS-29 spacecraft with NASA astronaut Anil Menon and Roscosmos cosmonauts Pyotr, Dubrov, and Kikina aboard occurred on time at 9:47 a.m. Central Time, 10:47 a.m. Eastern Time, which was 7:47 p.m. in Baikonur from Launch Pad 6, Site 31 in the Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. All three stages operated as expected during an 8-minute, 46-second ride to place Soyuz in its preliminary orbit where it is now. The Soyuz spacecraft has now begun a short 2-orbit chase to arrive at its final destination, the International Space Station. Docking today is scheduled for 12:56 p.m. Central Time, 1:56 p.m. Eastern Time, with live NASA coverage beginning at 12:10 p.m. Central Time, 1:10 p.m. Eastern. We will follow that up with live coverage of hatch opening and welcoming remarks beginning at 2:30 p.m. Central Time, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Until then, this is Mission Control Houston.